Welcome to Notes from the Wilderness. I am John Kirkwood, and we're going to start a series about making peace with your former self. My father used to say about hostile atheists that the really hostile atheist hates God and Christ and the Bible and Christians. And, that some do. some do, not all. Certainly not atheists that I've met and break bread with. But I bring that up because those four people groups, God, Christ, the Bible, and Christians, when someone goes through deconstruction, when somebody walks away from Plato's cave, when somebody deprograms from a cult, when somebody breaks free of an addiction, it's not a one-time thing. It's a lifelong process. If you know anyone who is an alcoholic or had an addiction to substance abuse, it's not a one-time thing. You got to put the work in, as they say. And for many of us who were born into a system, right? I know a lot of Christians who used to feel bad that they didn't have this awesome testimony about how they came to Christ, from Skid Row or from a life of crime or whatever. And then you'd hear these great testimonies from people who came to Christ late in life, or somebody like C.S. Lewis, who was a well-known atheist, and then came to Christ late in life. They have this wonderful testimony. And people who were born into it kind of feel like they were gypped, or like just like they're a second-class citizen when it comes to being a Christian or something. They never really experience that born-again moment where they have something in life that changes their trajectory and their perspective, and it brings them a great deal of elation and maybe even applause and celebration and so forth. And so it's different for all of us, I know. But when you leave the cave, some of us do have a born-again moment. You feel kind of like, who was it? Francis Ford Coppola, the great director, had some underappreciated works. It wasn't The Outsiders. It was not long after The Outsiders, he directed a film called Rumble Fish, based on a story about the motorcycle boy. And it didn't have the star-studded cast that The Outsiders did, but it was a wonderful story. It was a deeper story, a much deeper story than The Outsiders. And it was seen through the eyes of the protagonist, the motorcycle boy, played by Mickey Rourke, who actually in the story is a heroin addict, and he's colorblind. And so Coppola films the whole movie in black and white, so you're seeing it through the eyes of the motorcycle boy and the conclusions he comes to. And Spielberg would steal an element of this in his famous work Schindler's List, where he films the whole movie in black and white except for a little girl's coat, a little girl's pink coat. I'm not going to tell you what's in color in Rumblefish because I want you to watch it, but there is a scene where Mickey Rourke is walking with his little brother, Matt Dillon, and a side character who's kind of a nerd, kind of a geek, who's enthralled by these greasers, these tough gang members. And he wants to know what it's like to be Mickey Rourke, who's just feared and lauded by everyone in New York at the time. And Mickey Rourke is walking down a New York street, and this fellow looking up to him says, "What's it like to be you?" And Mickey Rourke says, "It's like living in a black and white TV with the sound turned down," right? So he's colorblind, and he's got these other sensory mishaps going on. And that's, to me, a great description of what life was previously like in Plato's cave, when so much of it was built on fear and what you shouldn't do and what you shouldn't read and what you shouldn't listen to and all kinds of things. And then when some people break free of that, when they get outside the cave, their first reaction is just liberation. It's you've broken free of the plantation. You are, Andy in Shawshank Redemption. You've climbed through the mire of the sewer pipe, and now you're being cleansed by the heavenly showers from above and your first breath of freedom. And there's just so much elation and jubilation. And what we don't realize is there's other things that come with that. Eventually, you're going to go through the stages of grief, because there are things to be grieved, things you will lose when you come out of the cave. I'm reminded of Daryl Davis, who's that wonderful rhythm and blues piano player who is an African American gentleman from the Baltimore area, but he is really known for having a knack to break bread with people who hate him, who despise him because he's black, and leading them out of the Ku Klux Klan. He's led over 200 people out of the Klan. Some of them are his dear friends now. And this is the greatest story that's never told. But, here's the thing that you don't hear when people are bragging about Daryl Davis and those stories is some of these people he's led out of the Klan. And it's all good, by the way. I'm not dissing this at all. It's a wonderful thing. It's a divine thing. It's a golden touch. But we only see the half of the story that shows the redemption of these men and women. What it doesn't show is all the grief that they go through because they've walked away, in many cases, from all they've known, including family and, traditions and tribe. And now, where they were once accepted and loved, they're hated. And so that we all have to come to grips with what that's like. It's not easy for anyone. There is so much beauty outside the cave, and it's worth it. It is absolutely worth it, but it comes with a cost, and some of that cost we have to make amends with ourselves. So this series is kind of making peace with the person you were, but it's also coming to a new conclusion on your perspective of who God is, who Jesus is, making peace with the Bible, making peace with those things that triggered us or that make us cringe or that ball up our fists and where our nails are digging into our palms and we don't realize it. Our teeth are being clenched, and these are the things we have nightmares about now. So all this came to me actually this morning because of conversations I've had with my children and kind of nightmares I had last night, conversations with my wife. And I thought, I need to do a series on this, and I need to do it now. And so when you get outside the cave, it's not just all applause and redemption and elation and wonder at all those things that you were afraid of before that now you find amazing and interesting, and your curiosity has never been so piqued as it is now. And there's so many good things that come with deconstruction. There's a few that come with a cost. And so today we're going to focus on one of the first two parts is how you view your old self. Because one of the things we carry outside of the cave is guilt. And some of it is shame. And that person we used to be is embarrassing to us in some cases because we held to beliefs that we find now to be abhorrent, to be horrible, to be ugly. And we've left them behind, and yet we still are reminded, whether it's from Facebook memories or from people that we haven't seen in a while or from the gossip on the grapevine in the old tribe that leaks out. All that is compounded, and so sometimes it's like a roller coaster out here. There's highs, there's very high highs, and there's very deep lows. I want to walk you through that because, folks, it's not your fault. It really isn't. To coin a phrase from another movie, Good Will Hunting, when Robin Williams has to say that over and over and over again to the main character of the film. And he has to tell him over and over again, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. And it takes it a while to settle in. It takes us a while to look at our old self and to forgive that person and to realize that that person was doing the best they could. That's the environment they grew up in. That's what they were taught. I'm not going to use the term brainwashed or propaganda because everybody in that world probably believed it sincerely. We were misled. We didn't understand the world around us. We had maybe a primitive view of it. But everyone we grew up with, brothers, sisters, parents, grandparents, we grew up in a church where all the people we knew, maybe even all the people we went to school with, maybe we were such in a cloistered space or an insulated space that, that's all we knew. I had a friend growing up who was bragging to me, boasting to me at one point that all his friends from high school were people who went to Awana with him in his church. And I said to him something that bowled him over. I said, well, then who was your ministry to? He didn't have a ministry to anyone around him that wasn't in his clique, in his tribe. And that's the danger of evangelical Christianity, of some of it, of being so cloistered in the tribe that it's just us and them. And the others are dangerous, and they're not to be, trifled with. They're not to be befriended. How do you love a neighbor that you look at that way? I don't know. It's difficult, but let's get into this. So I want to give you a few notes about this part of your journey. I really do, and I want to move through it kind of slowly. But let's start with this first section. You weren't crazy. You weren't. We were born into these systems and beliefs, and we didn't choose our families. And in evangelicalism, oftentimes what's rewarded is conformity, and curiosity is suppressed, right? And it's shrouded and guarded with fear. And that's just literally what we grew up in. I would just like to encourage you not to judge the child you were with the mind you have now. All right? Look back maybe with pity. Look at how much, and by the way, even with your parents and your youth pastors, whatever, look back with pity because they thought they were doing their best in most cases. Now, I know there's particular cases that might not fit for you, but stay with us. Something here there'll be a shoe here that fits eventually, but maybe this one doesn't. But our parents, I've made mistakes as a parent, and I've apologized to my children for it. And that happened this week, actually, and that's what brought this on, is a memory where my son came to me, and he was in college, and he brought me some paperwork from his anthropology course, and basically proving evolution and so forth. And of course, this was a bozo no in our world, and I looked at it and I tried to refute it. I didn't listen. I just said, well, this is their worldview, and this is where they're coming from, and this is why they're wrong. And Connor said to me last night, he said, that was the first time in my life. He was a freshman in college. He said, that was the first time in my life where I thought for the first time that you might be wrong about something. Because I wasn't thinking critically. I wasn't examining the evidence. I wasn't particularly steel-manning the other point of view. And he came to that conclusion before I did. And years later, when I came to that conclusion after reading Francis Collins' book, The Language of God, and realizing that evolution, I finally accepted evolution reluctantly, the most reluctant convert. I brought my sons into the room and I apologized to them. So anyway, don't judge the child you were with the mind you have now. You were doing your best, and maybe those around you were all doing their best. They thought this is the best thing to do. And yet there were traditions and verses and so forth that we'll have to unpack that were meant to be a gatekeeper, to scare you. They were a boogeyman, so you didn't think a certain way or read certain books or entertain certain ideas. We'd hear verses like, the heart is deceitful above all things. This was meant to silence our intuition. And it was contradictory from what Paul says in Romans about our human conscience, and how we could rely on our conscience. So I am not what happened to me, writes Carl Jung. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. I am what I choose to become. So we know better now because we became better. So let's start with this. You weren't crazy. You weren't crazy. You were conditioned. That's true of us all, right? We weren't crazy. We were conditioned. Secondly, you were surviving, not sinning. All right? So, yes, maybe at the time you held to beliefs that now you'd look back on and you find abhorrent. I mean, I came out of a world, let's face it, that was patriarchal. It is. Christianity is a patriarchal system because it's based on a book that was written by patriarchal men in a primal past. And it's just that. And so maybe you come out of that system and maybe you entertain a homophobic position, you know. Maybe you were an us and them kind of person. Maybe you come out of a Calvinist tradition where the whole world is, forgive my language, shit. As Luther looked upon even saved individuals as just snow covering a cow patty. Maybe you come out of that world where everyone is totally depraved, and so you have a suspicion of other people, not a love for them. You were told they were hellbound and hell deserving, and they're nothing without God, and they're enemies of God, and they're totally depraved, and you know, it's pretty hard to love a person that God has ordained to burn in hell if Jesus doesn't intervene, right? And we know in that tradition that most people are going to burn in hell, so why waste time loving them, you know? There's contradictions there. So first of all, you weren't sinning. You were surviving. You were taught certain things, and certain things were applauded in that world. You got a gold sticker if you thought a certain way, if you gave a certain answer in Sunday school, if you avoided this, and if you practiced that. You know the world. That's the world we grew up in. But be easy on yourself. Offer yourself some, as the girls over at Deconstructing Mama say, some grace and some space. It's the best you knew. That's the system you grew up in. So you were surviving, you weren't sinning. And then regret. You're going to have regrets. I still cringe when I hear somebody like Madonna say, I have no regrets. I really cringe when I hear a professing Christian, even a young Christian like the president, Donald Trump, say he's never asked God for forgiveness. He never felt it was necessary. That's the most unchristian thing in the world to say, but yet people give him a pass. I don't know. I think the person who has no regret has no soul. That's a psychopath. That's a sociopath. That's somebody who has no empathy. And if you read Madonna's life, she trampled thousands of people to get where she was, and to have no regrets. Now, there are some people who say, well, I have no regrets because I needed all that baggage to get me to where I am now, to bring me the wisdom I have now, or to allow for me to be the me I am now. I needed to go through all that. That's different. I think they're using regret in a wrong manner. I'm using regret as thinking back on a past event and wishing you could have a do-over. Wishing you wouldn't have spoken those words. My mom used to say, you know, be very careful with your words because there's no string attached to them and you can't pull them back. Some people can unsend a text and unsend an email now. You can't unsend a statement that you put out there, especially into a person's being, you know. So I think of my mom, be careful with your words. We can't pull them back. We can apologize, but they're there. They came out, whether you were drunk, whether you were angry, whatever. They're not forgotten. when they cut to the bone. They're not forgotten. They may be forgiven. They're not forgotten. So you got to forgive yourself. And if you have regret, that's okay. As a matter of fact, that's like growing pains. You know, being a teenager, going through puberty, going through that rapid period of growth that we all do before we get to that point where, you know, we're not going to grow any taller. And there's not going to be any more development in certain areas. We might grow out, but we don't grow up. And as we're going through that, some of us have a growth spurt, you know. Scottie Pippen of the Chicago Bulls had a late growth spurt. He was short, and then he grew like 4 or 5 inches in a year. That must have been painful. Growing pains are painful, but they're necessary, and they're good. They get you to a better place. In Scottie's case, they got him to the NBA. So pain, there is pain that is simply bad all the time. But there is pain that is good. And the pain of regret can be bad if it turns into remorse, if you don't grow from it, if it doesn't shape you in a positive way, if you simply go back to it and it drags you down into despair and into depression. That's a negative thing. But regret can be a builder. Regret can be something that you look back on and you say, that was then, this is now. And you know, alcoholics go through this. There's a step where they make amends. This is how you deal with regret. You make amends. And this first step, well, it's not making amends to people we've hurt. It's making amends with your former self. People who've hurt you. It's forgiving that former self who didn't mean to hurt the future them. They thought they were doing as best they could and growing as best they could, developing as best they could. So regret is a sign of growth. It's a sign that you're alive and you're not a narcissist. You're not a megalomaniac. You're not a sociopath. You have empathy. You put yourself back in your former self and you look at all those relationships that you harmed or didn't have because of where you were. Forgive that person. And this is why I'm going to suggest a few practical things before we close. But I want to stay on regret for a second because you know better now because you became better. That's what happened. It was a journey. It's a path. And to be honest with you, we haven't arrived yet. We're still on that path. We're still on that journey. We're looking over our shoulder, or maybe we're looking in the rearview mirror. And remember, look back, as my father, Jim Kirkwood, used to say, only look back for 2 reasons. For entertainment, to laugh and remember wonderful things, even things where we might have stumbled and now we could look back on and laugh when at the time we just cried. And for education. Look back for education, and part of that education is looking back at our regrets, embracing them, and setting that person free of the weight of those errors that led to our current regret. It's always past errors or past discretions or past transgressions that lead to today's regrets. And at the time, tomorrow's regrets. Christ's prayer from the cross, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do. Now, maybe the Bible triggers you, but there's passages that I want you to reclaim in your new life, and that's one of them. Forgive yourself. You didn't know what you were doing. Now, there's some occasions where we did know what we were doing, and we hurt people. And we did it out of anger or out of jealousy or out of other things. I'm not talking about that. That's a subject for another day. Certainly, that's a deep regret, and you should ask that person for forgiveness and do your best to make amends with that person. That's a separate issue. This is something that you thought was healthy, that you thought was life-giving, that you thought would please God, that certainly pleased your church and your parents at the time, or the world that you lived in. It pleased your tribe. It probably still pleases your tribe, but you broke free of that. You're no longer in the KKK. You no longer hold to racism or sexism or homophobia or denial of science. You've left that. And some of us can't forgive ourselves because some of us spent 50 years there. And so there's a lot of baggage to unpack. I understand. I'm one of the ones who spent 50 years there. And it's a little different for me because I wasn't in the pew, I was in the pulpit. So there's an extra degree of shame that I'll end with. If you were a spiritual leader, you carry extra shame out of that cave. You do. We do. We do. It's like being a camp guard at a concentration camp, and not being an inmate. You know, that's the level of regret. If you were in the pew, folks, that's how much more regret we have when we deconstruct, pastors and spiritual leaders. So here's a practical goal that I'd like you to practice going forward. Maybe start this week. You know, you could start today. You could start right after we're done here. But first, I want to end this portion by saying you were taught to fear your own questions. That wasn't faith, that was control. You were taught to fear your own questions. That wasn't faith, that was control. Now you're free to explore those questions, and that's a good thing. Celebrate that, but go easy on the person who was chained in the cave. You had chains around you there. You had peer pressure, not just from peers, but from siblings, from parents, from grandparents, from a systemic institution that you were born into. You were born on that plantation. Now, Harriet Tubman led you to freedom, whatever that may be, whoever led you outside the cave, whatever enticed you. It might have been a person. It might have been a YouTube video. It might have been a series of unanswered questions that made you feel uncomfortable. It might have been you getting a glimpse of the attic in Dorian Gray's house and seeing the ugliness that you were becoming. Because your conscience within you, as Paul says in Romans 1, was screaming, and you only heard it as a little whisper. But then you started to attune your ears to it, and it became louder and louder. So go easy on that self. You were taught to fear those questions. Now you're open to embrace them, but that wasn't faith. That was control. Now some of it still goes on from the cave because those arms still try to reach out and drag you back in. Here's what I suggest you do this week. And I hope you're journaling. I hope you have a faith journal. Please. This will be something you could give to your children. This will be something you can give to your older self. This is the Notebook, like in the movie. And it's a deeper than a romance between a husband and a wife. This is the adventure. This is the heroic adventure of you becoming a man or a woman, you becoming the hero of your own story, breaking free from Shawshank. Okay, I gave you some prompts here for this letter that you can share to your former self. Maybe you start it with, I forgive you. 4. This letter should answer to the guilt you're carrying. It should address it, and it should forgive it. It should answer to the shame. It should recognize it, it should understand it, and it should forgive it. There's something more with shame, though, that we can do. Now, some of you will keep this letter to yourself, and that's fine. If you'd like to share your letters with me anonymously, you could share them with me. Some of you might even give me permission to read from some of them. But if you keep this just in your faith journal and you don't share it with anyone, it's important you share it with yourself. Your today self and your yesterday self. So have a conversation with that person. That person might be 18 when he left the cave. In my case, it was a period between probably 48 and 52. And you're sharing with that person. But there should be forgiveness in this letter. I now understand that you blank. If you don't know how to start, just take these prompts and fill in the blanks. And then maybe you go back. Maybe each one of these prompts is a separate page that you could fill in underneath. Don't put them all on one page, because who knows how long. One of these segments might be longer than the other. Make them each a page in your journal. I forgive you for blank. I forgive you for believing that homosexuality was a choice and an abomination. I forgive you for believing that people of other faith were not children of God. I forgive you for believing that Catholics weren't Christians. I forgive you for believing X, Y, and Z. I now understand that you were doing your best. I now understand that you had overwhelming pressure around you to conform. I now understand that you grew up in an environment that punished who you are now, that feared who you are now. But I want to thank you you do have gratitude for that person that was back in the cave, because you wouldn't be where you are now unless that person broke his chains or her chains through a thought process, through an evaluation process, through thinking what I once thought was an asset I now see as a liability, and counting the cost of actually having to say, this could cost me my marriage. This could cost me my job. This could cost me my status in my peer group. This could cost me my promotion. This could cost me the esteem in which I'm held in my tradition, in my tribe, in my family, in my neighborhood. And for counting that cost, and for taking that first step. You know, we look back now and we think we're making important steps now. We are. Every step you take in your journey of growth is important and brings a blessing and a cost. And yet those first steps, passing through the birth canal. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We should be eternally grateful for the courage that that person demonstrated. Do you know the courage it takes for somebody who's born into a KKK environment to listen to a black man? To actually see him as a human being, to weigh what he has to say, and then to take his argument and accept it for the truth that it is, and realize that it means that everyone you held dear was wrong, including yourself, and to walk away from it. I'm proud of you for surviving. These are just prompts that I'd like to say to myself. But if they help you, great. If you think of others, share them with me. Share them with the group if you want. Share them in a comment underneath this video, or write to me privately. There are other prompts. You'll have personal prompts. Every journey's different, but some of us have walked the same path. It's narrow coming out of that cave. So I forgive you for. I now understand that I thank you for, and I'm proud of you for surviving. Why? When we come out of that cave, wow, it's painful. You know, a child is born into this world screaming, crying, right? It's a traumatic experience. Everything that was once comfortable is now new and kind of frightful. You know, you come out of the cave having never been out in the daylight. Your eyes hurt. Everything hurts. You can't see. Your orientation is confused. Even if you're excited, even if you have an adventurous spirit, it's still disorienting. And to come out of the cave, to come out of Plato's cave, you don't come out unscathed. You don't come out clean. You're not like that newborn baby. You've had a traumatic birth. You carry scars. Some of them run deep. And it's not just scars. and scar tissue. You have open wounds. We need healing when we come out of that cave. Healing's a process. Some of these wounds will be open for years. And we should tend to them now. And this is one way to tend to them. But everyone comes out of that cave with wounds. And there is a cost. And so I'm proud of you for surviving the fact that your family now has buried you in a mock burial. They now consider you a black sheep. They're ashamed of you. They're embarrassed of you. They practice, the evangelical church doesn't know how to handle deconstruction. It doesn't handle it well. Just look at how the apologists try to handle it. But families are even worse because guess what? They listen to the apologists. And they don't love and they don't listen. And they think the loving thing to do is tough love, to shame and to shun you back into the fold. Disregarding what Christ teaches about the good shepherd and the great shepherd. They think the older brother in the field has the right process, shaming and shunning. And so they practice as the Pharisee would, as the older brother in the field. And that costs you, and it grieves you, and it's a process to get through that. Your old church family talks behind your back, and it gets back to you, says things, derides you, mocks you. I still have people from my old church. I don't know why they follow the Sparrow's Call, some of them, because it irritates the hell out of them. And the only time I see them comment is with embarrassment that I once was their pastor. There's a particularly angry fellow that every time I make a point of gratitude that I've grown and I've grown away from certain ideals that this person still holds, he attacks me. I try to be generous with him because I used to be there myself, but the anger is speaking from him. So I'm proud of you for surviving what it took for you to be where you are now. And it took that kid back then having guts and having the courage to ask the question, what if I'm wrong? What if what I believe now is wrong, and what if it's hateful? What if it's ridiculous? What if it's harmful to the well-being of my neighbors, to my children, to my spouse, to myself? Now, some of us, I bring this up because some of us aren't just going to need this or the faith journal or the deconstruction journal, if you don't want to use the word faith. We are going to need to sit with a professional, to sit with a therapist. Some of us need therapy, and some of us have been helped by therapy to work through the neurotrauma of the neuroscience of religious trauma. And we grew up in a tradition that poo-pooed that, forgive me, that thought that was a witch doctor, that thought it was contrary and antithetical to God's wisdom in the Bible. And so you were taught, you were conditioned to be distrustful of psychology or psychiatry, of talking to a counselor, of growth through therapy. You may need it now to help get beyond some of this, to help deal with some of the pain and the loss. So this is just a step, the letter to yourself. And yet I think it's a necessary step. Finally, I want to share to you a few things. This is my hope for us. May you forgive the you who stayed too long. I say to Wendy all the time, I just wish we would have realized this 10 years sooner, 20 years sooner, before we became parents. Because we've harmed our children. All three of them were harmed in growing up in the same tradition we were. And Wendy and I, as parents, tried to bring them up in that tradition as faithful as we could, and they were harmed in it. And there's nothing worse than looking back as a parent and carrying regret as a parent because what you thought was health-giving to your children was actually harming them. May you show grace to the you who only knew how to survive, and may you walk forward with the you who's learning to live free. This is my hope for you. You could write it down in your journal if you'd like to. I do want to share a couple other things to you before I leave, and one is a quote by Brennan Manning. Brennan Manning writes, "In a futile attempt to erase our past, we deprive the community of our healing gift. If we conceal our wounds out of fear and shame, our inner darkness can neither be illuminated nor become a light for others." And folks, this is how you can deal with shame. Now, most of this you could do anonymously, but with shame, I encourage you to bring it out into the light. You're going to need to if you're going to ask for people's forgiveness. But your story is valuable. Don't be embarrassed of it like your family is. Don't be embarrassed of it and hide it and shun it as your old tradition, as the tribe would have you. It's something to be celebrated that you overcame. And folks, your story is a map to others who are trapped in that cave. Your story is hopeful. It's the path of Andy Dufresne out of Shawshank. It's hope not as an ideal or as a dream, but as a reality. When people can look at you and see the courage and the bravery and the trajectory that you took and the path you took and how you were once A and now you're B, and how you were once a larva and now you're flying with butterfly wings. That's the inspiration they need. Don't be selfish about this. Give up your shame to the glory of truth and of well-being. And if you still hold God dear, give it up to God. Bring it out into the light, ask for people's forgiveness, but also bring it out and let people know you are grateful that you got out and you're not that person that you once were, or that you don't carry the ideals that you once did. You've forgiven that person. That person is the reason you're here now, so you're grateful for that person. But it is a futile attempt to try and erase our past, to try and cover it up, to not mention it. So we deprive the community of our healing gift. That includes brothers and sisters that you left behind in the cave. Some of you might have younger brothers and sisters, or, friends, and they look at you maybe with disdain, but maybe a year from now, that conscience starts knocking on their heart's door, and they remember you, and they remember your story. And if you just leave without saying anything, your story isn't a roadmap to them. You haven't led signs. I grew up in the Chicago area. I used to love to go to Woodstock. Woodstock was a spot. You all know Woodstock from the movie Groundhog Day. And in that movie, you could see a couple of the old buildings in the square that were used on the Underground Railroad. Yes, to smuggle escaped slaves from the slavery of the South up to freedom in Canada. And there's an underground passageway that went from one building to another, and there were marks that people would put on their chimneys to alert people that this was a safe place to come if you were an escaped slave, that you'd be fed and clothed and protected and ushered on your journey toward freedom. I love Woodstock for that, for many other reasons too. The chocolate shop was one of them, but I just love Woodstock for that history. But folks, that's you. You can be a marker. You mark your chimney for others who might follow in your footsteps a year later, 2 years later, 5 years later. Maybe your story is when your children tell other people who are locked in that environment to inspire others. I want my children to be able to tell others the most meaningful impact in their lives was not how right my dad was, but when he came to us when he was wrong and when he was convinced he was wrong and apologized to us in the living room for leading us astray. In a futile attempt to erase our past, we deprive the community of our healing gift. If we conceal our wounds out of fear and shame, our inner darkness can neither be illuminated nor become a light for others. Folks, this is the difference between Jewish pottery and Japanese pottery. And I'm sorry, the Bible gets it wrong here. The potters in the Bible, when a vase would crack, they'd do one of two things. They'd conceal the crack with wax and paint over it, and now something valuable became something cheap, something insincere. The word sinicere in the Latin is a compound that means without wax. And it used to be a sign hung in the marketplace, bragging that this pottery hasn't been cracked when it was fired and patched with wax and covered up with paint. That it's sinicere, it's without wax, it's whole, it's authentic, and it's more valuable. That's one thing that the Hebrews used to do. They used to try and cover it up and sell it as something whole. It was a hypocrite. You know what the other thing they do? And you know it from the story of Christ, because Judas bought a potter's field, a worthless field where broken pottery was scattered in the ground. They throw it out. I don't know. To me, that's not Christ-like. To me, that's not biblical, and yet it is biblical. To me, the ancient Japanese tradition of kintsukuroi, or kintsugi, what we know as kintsugi, is more Christ-like. It doesn't conceal the wound. It heals the wound with golden glue and leaves it to be seen. A scar in the pottery that has been made more valuable for having been broken and mended. This is what it means. It's a philosophy that far exceeds that which you find in the Bible of hypocrisy or simply disposal. Because the human soul shouldn't be a hypocrite or disposable. Your scars are valuable. Paint them with gold. And that gold is the redemption story that you share with others. And you could proudly display that. Put it out as a centerpiece. Trust me, you won't regret it. All right, my final statement is actually for those pastors or spiritual leaders who may be watching. If you're like me, you carry an extra burden. That burden is an extra degree of shame because you participated in keeping people away from the mouth of the cave. You participated in using misunderstanding or things that are simply untrue and now that you find ugly to keep people in ignorance. So if you, like me, were once a spiritual leader, this is what I say to you, and it follows up on what Brendan Manning just said. We preached the sermons. We led the worship. We enforced the boundaries. We did. And we taught the theology. We were camp guards. We can't deny it. Don't hide from it. Don't change your name. We need to embrace it. We need to come out. Because if we try to hide it, the shame will run even deeper. If we deny it, we know it's there. And we won't be proud of ourselves. And we should be. We've been through a lot. We've gotten 90% there. We've helped ourselves, but we can further help ourselves, our future self. And we could help, more importantly, others who are still suffering. And you could be an inspiration to other pastors who are going through doubt, who are wondering, is what I'm doing wrong? Is what I'm doing hurting others? It's a hard truth. I'm not going to soften it for you. You know, some of you have carried it. Some of you are where I am. Some of you are still in the pulpit. And you're weighing the cost of starting life anew, maybe in your 50s like me. Maybe you're scared because you don't know what to do. You don't know how you're going to put bread on the table for your family. You don't know how you're going to look at yourself in the mirror if you don't do something. If you've come out of the cave like me, you were doing what you believed was right at the time. I can tell you, I can say with 100% honesty, Every message I ever preached, I did with authenticity. I truly believed every word I said. I stayed away from things I was unsure about, or I wasn't confident in teaching, or I didn't want to teach that I disagreed with, but I didn't want anyone to know I disagreed with it. I stayed away from those things. I didn't bring them into the pulpit. Everything I brought into the pulpit, I sincerely held. And maybe you're like that. So you did what you thought was right at the time. We were trying to be faithful. We were likely trained in those beliefs. We were applauded in those beliefs. We were celebrated in those beliefs. We were promoted for our certainty for those beliefs. And so it's very hard to walk away from something, from a belief that carries a paycheck with it, that carries adulation with it, that carries esteem with it. It's not easy to do. If you've done it, good for you. So we've left that stage. We've dropped the mic. We've laid it down. And maybe we're still grieving what you once upheld, what you once held as laudable, as righteous. I just want to tell you that grief is sacred ground. You haven't left the sacred ground. You've come to it, and you've bowed, and you prayed, and you've asked for forgiveness, and you're making amends. And part of those amends is to tell your story, is to share it, break free from the ghosts of Christmas past. Because our story doesn't end back there. It only ends back there if we hide it, if we suppress it, if we squelch it, if we're ashamed of it, if we continue to be ashamed of it. It ends back there. Don't let it. You weren't meant to be buried in a cave. The best amends we can make is to walk forward in truth, to hold space for the walking wounded around us, right? We could still lead, folks. You're still a spiritual leader to some people. I know there's at least 2 families from my former church, and there may be many others that are hiding and following me unknown, but there are at least 2 voices that write to me and are grateful. They've come along for the journey. They too were in a similar spot, and they're grateful that I'm speaking out. They're grateful that I'm back now. They missed me. So this journey, we're still evolving. Hold space for the wounded. Let's become a voice for healing. That's the greatest thing you could do with your shame. And it's magical. It's when you bring it out into the open. It's when you address it. It's when you don't deny it and you say, yeah, that was me. Yeah, if you Googled me, those ugly things you found, that was me. I'm not going to lie to you. That was who I was. That was what I believed. But I'm different now. I don't hold those views anymore. I want to be a voice of healing instead of harm. So, you're not the villain. You're not the villain in others' stories. Even those people who hate you now because you left the cave, you're not the villain. They just hate the hero. They just hate your bravery. They hate your audacity and your courage. And they see it not as something, not as a vice, but as they see your virtue as a vice. But it is your virtue. Be proud of it. Wear it like a golden scar. You know, don't cover your tattoos, right? So, we're all human. We've evolved. If you've broken free, you've evolved. You're in a different place now. And the truth is, we're still evolving. And that, my friends, that is our redemption story. That is our Shawshank Redemption. Now, thank you for listening. I appreciate you all. We'll see you next week.